The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Chicago when the first alien ship appeared. It materialized silently above the Willis Tower, a massive vessel that stretched for miles across the sky. People stopped on sidewalks, pointing upward, with their phones out, thinking it was some kind of elaborate movie stunt or publicity campaign. Admiral Cuthfer stood on the bridge of his flagship, his 4 golden eyes scanning the primitive cityscape below. The buildings looked crude and inefficient compared to the soaring crystal spires of his homeworld. The atmosphere readings showed dangerous levels of pollution that would have killed most civilized species within hours. Yet these humans thrived in such conditions, which made them perfect for what he had planned. "Commander Veltara," he said to his second gang command, a tall female with silver skin and elegant features. "Begin the harvest immediately. We need at least 2 million specimens from this continent alone." "Admiral," she replied, her voice carrying concern, "the Council of Worlds has not approved forced conscription of pre-warp civilizations. This violates several treaties." Cuthfer's expression hardened. "The Void Swarm has consumed 17 star systems in the past month. Our own forces are failing against them.
Ow.
These humans breed quickly and die easily. They're exactly what we need to slow down the enemy advance while our scientists develop better weapons." On the streets of Chicago, the first tractor beams began to activate. Brilliant blue columns of light descended from the ship, and anyone caught within them found themselves slowly rising into the air. The beams were selective, targeting only healthy adults between the ages of 18 and 40-5. Jake Rodriguez was making coffee in his small apartment when the light surrounded him. The 23-year-old Marine sergeant had just returned from his second deployment in Afghanistan and was enjoying a rare moment of peace. His girlfriend Emma was still asleep in the bedroom when the walls around him became transparent. "Emma," he shouted as his feet left the ground. "Emma, wake up." Psh! Rushed out of the bedroom just in time to see him disappearing through what should have been solid concrete. Her screams echoed through the apartment building as dozens of other residents were similarly taken. Across the city, the same scene played out thousands of times. Construction worker Mike Thompson was operating a crane when the beam caught him. His hard hat fell 40 stories to the pavement below as he was pulled upward, his co-workers watching in stunned silence. The massive yellow crane swayed dangerously without an operator, its load of steel beams crashing into the building below. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was performing surgery at Chicago General Hospital when the beam found her. The 35-year-old trauma surgeon had been working for 18 hours straight, trying to save a car accident victim. Her hands were steady as she sutured an artery when the blue light surrounded the entire operating room. "Dr. Mitchell," her nurse called out as Sarah began to rise. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Sarah replied, still holding her surgical instruments. "Someone else needs to close. The patient will die if we don't finish." But there was no time. The beam lifted her through the ceiling, through 3 floors of hospital rooms, and into the sky. Below, her patient died on the operating table as the remaining medical staff stared upward in shock. The alien ship's cargo holds were designed to process thousands of beings at once. Humans were sorted by age, health, and physical condition. Those deemed unfit were immediately returned to Earth via the same tractor beams. The rest were herded into massive chambers where they received basic medical examinations and translator implants. Tom Baker, a 19-year-old engineering student from Northwestern University, found himself pressed against hundreds of other confused and terrified humans. He had been studying for his final exams when the beam took him from his dormitory room. The thin young man clutched a photo of his family that he had managed to grab as he was lifted away. "What do they want with us?" whispered an elderly woman beside him. "I don't know," Tom replied, his voice shaking. "But these aren't human ships. Look at the walls, the architecture. Everything is wrong." The walls around them were organic in appearance, with a strange blue-green tint that seemed to pulse with inner light. The air had a metallic taste that made their throats burn. Strange symbols covered every surface, shifting and changing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. A voice boomed through the chamber, speaking in dozens of languages simultaneously thanks to the translator implants. "Citizens of Earth, You have been selected for military service in the Galactic Defense Coalition. Your planet is now under Coalition protection, and service is mandatory for all capable individuals. The humans began shouting questions and demands, but the voice continued without pause. You will receive basic training in Coalition weapons and tactics. Survival rates for new recruits average 37% in current combat zones. Those who survive their first year of service will be eligible for extended training programs. Jake Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, his military training taking over despite the impossible situation. "I'm a United States Marine," he announced to anyone who would listen. "We need to stay calm and organized. Find out who has military or police experience. We'll need leaders." Dr. Mitchell was in a separate chamber with other medical personnel. The aliens had identified. She watched through a transparent wall as thousands of humans were processed like cattle. Her surgeon's training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Treating us like resources," she told a nurse from Boston General who had been taken alongside her. "Look at how they're sorting us. Age, health, skill sets. We're not prisoners of war, we're conscripts." The transport ships began launching within hours of the initial harvest. Earth grew smaller in the viewing ports as massive vessels carried their human cargo toward the galactic core. The Coalition had been fighting the Void Swarm for 3 years, losing ground in every engagement. Their own species had grown too civilized, too dependent on technology and strategy. They needed something the enemy couldn't predict or counter. Admiral Kethfer reviewed the collection reports with satisfaction. 2.3 million humans had been successfully harvested from Earth. The primitive world's military forces had been completely unable to respond to the threat. A few fighter jets had been launched, but they were easily disabled by the Coalition's defensive systems. "The humans seem more aggressive than expected," Commander Valterra observed. "Several attempted to attack our collection teams with primitive weapons." "Good," Kethfer replied. "Aggression is exactly what we need. The Void Swarm has adapted to our conventional tactics. These humans might provide the chaos factor we've been lacking." As the transport ships jumped to hyperspace, carrying their human cargo toward an unknown fate, Earth's governments finally began to respond. But it was too late. The conscription was complete, and the galaxy's newest soldiers were already traveling toward a war they couldn't understand, armed with weapons they had never seen, fighting an enemy that had never heard of humanity. The consequences of that decision would reshape the galaxy in ways that Admiral Kethfer could never have imagined. The red sand of training camp Theta 7 stretched endlessly under 3 alien suns. The heat was unbearable, designed to break the spirit of new recruits within their first week. Massive stone buildings rose from the desert floor, their walls covered in strange symbols that hurt human eyes to look at directly. This was where the Coalition turned civilians into soldiers. The mortality rate during training alone was 15%. Jake Rodriguez stood at attention in the blazing heat, sweat pouring down his face as Warlord Thakmer circled the human recruits. The Gractal instructor stood nearly 8 feet tall, his gray skin covered in battle scars, his forearms each holding a different weapon. His species had been warriors for 10,000 years, and he viewed the humans with open disgust. "Are weak," Thakmer growled, his voice like grinding stone. "Your bodies are soft, your minds undisciplined. So most of you will die in your first battle. The few who survive will wish they had died with honor instead of living as cowards." The human recruits had been training for 2 weeks, and many were already showing signs of breaking. The alien weapons were too heavy, the combat techniques too complex, the entire military doctrine foreign to human understanding. But Jake noticed something the aliens missed. While humans were struggling with Coalition methods, they were also adapting in ways no other species had. Tom Baker knelt beside his assigned plasma rifle, the weapon partially disassembled on the ground before him. The 19-year-old college student had never been athletic, never shown interest in military service, but his engineering mind was fascinated by the alien technology. His thin fingers moved carefully through the weapon's components, mapping each circuit and power relay. "This design is wasteful," he muttered to himself, studying the energy flow patterns. "They're losing 30% efficiency through redundant Systems. Mike Thompson, the construction worker from Chicago, watched Tom work with growing interest. "Back home, we'd call this over-engineered garbage," he said quietly. "Too many parts, too complicated for field maintenance." Tom nodded, his eyes lighting up with understanding. "Exactly. Look at this power coupling here. It's designed to prevent overload, but it also limits maximum output. If we bypass this safety circuit and reroute the power through the secondary matrix." His fingers moved quickly, reconnecting wires and adjusting components. The other humans in their squad gathered around, watching with curiosity rather than the fear that other species showed toward unfamiliar technology. "Recruit Baker," Thokmer's voice boomed across the training ground. "Step away from the weapon immediately. Humans are not authorized to modify Coalition equipment." But Tom had already finished his modifications. He reassembled the rifle quickly, his movements smooth and confident. When he stood and aimed at the practice target, the weapon felt different in his hands. Lighter. More responsive, he pulled the trigger. The plasma beam that emerged was 50% more powerful than standard Coalition weapons. The target didn't just hit its mark, it vaporized completely, leaving only a crater in the ground. Other humans erupted in excited whispers, crowding around Tom to see what he had done. Thakmer strode over, his forearms flexing with barely contained rage. "You have destroyed Coalition property," he snarled. "This will result in disciplinary action." "The weapon works better now," Tom replied calmly. "I can show the other recruits how to make the same improvements." "Improvements?" Slackmer's laugh was like breaking glass. "You think you can improve technology that has been perfected over millennia? You were an arrogant child from a primitive world?" Jake stepped forward, his military training taking over. "Sir, with respect, if the modification increases weapon effectiveness, shouldn't we at least test it properly? You dare question my authority?" Thakmer raised one of his weapons, pointing it at Jake's chest. "Perhaps you need a lesson in proper respect for your superiors." But before he could act, another voice interrupted. "Warlord Thakmer, report to command immediately." The message came from the camp's communication system, and even the proud Greykdal warrior couldn't ignore a direct order from his superiors. As Thakmer stalked away, the humans began clustering around Tom, eager to learn his modifications. Word spread quickly through the camp that someone had figured out how to make Coalition weapons more effective. Within hours, dozens of human recruits were modifying their equipment, sharing techniques and improvements. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was having similar experiences in the medical facilities. The Coalition's medical technology was incredibly advanced, using nanotechnology and biogel compounds that could heal injuries that would be fatal to humans. But their methods were slow and methodical, designed for species that rarely suffered traumatic injuries. "The nanobots are programmed to work gradually," explained her supervisor, Healer Morthy. The Valtheri was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to see everything. Rapid healing can cause cellular damage in most species. Sarah watched as the alien healers worked on a Greykdal warrior who had been injured. In a training accident, the nanobots were slowly repairing torn muscle tissue, but the process would take hours. In a human hospital, such an injury would be treated immediately with surgery and conventional medicine. "What if we combine your nanobots with human surgical techniques?" Sarah suggested. "We could use surgery to repair the major damage quickly, then use the nanobots for fine tissue repair and infection prevention." Morthy looked skeptical. "Your species uses crude cutting instruments and chemical compounds. Such methods are considered barbaric by civilized standards." "But they work," Sarah insisted. "And sometimes fast and crude is better than slow and perfect." She began developing hybrid techniques, combining human surgical knowledge with alien technology. When the next batch of injured trainees arrived, she was ready. Using a combination of human surgical speed and alien nanotechnology, she was able to treat patients in minutes rather than hours. The breakthrough came during the Battle of Kepler 4 for to see. The mining colony was under attack by the Void Swarm, massive organic ships that seemed to absorb energy weapons and turn them into fuel for their own systems. The Coalition's conventional forces were being systematically destroyed. their careful tactical formations useless against an enemy that adapted to every strategy. The human units were deployed as expendable shock troops, expected to delay the enemy long enough for the main coalition forces to retreat. Jake Rodriguez led his squad through the colony's maintenance tunnels, a route that coalition commanders had dismissed as too dangerous and unpredictable. The aliens think in straight lines, Jake told his squad as they crawled through the narrow passages. They plan for every contingency except the impossible ones. They emerged behind enemy lines, in the middle of a void swarm bioship that was draining power from the colony's main reactor. The organic walls pulsed with alien life, and the air was thick with spores that made breathing difficult. Tom Baker had modified not just his weapon, but his entire equipment loadout. When they encountered void swarm defenders, he discovered something the coalition had missed. The organic ships could absorb energy weapons, but they were vulnerable to simple chemical explosives. Their biology is designed to process energy, he explained, as he rigged improvised bombs from mining equipment. But chemical reactions are too chaotic for them to control. The explosions tore through the bioship's organic structure, causing massive damage that the creature couldn't repair. For the first time in 3 years, a void swarm vessel was forced to retreat from a battle. Admiral Kethfer reviewed the battle reports with growing concern. Humans had achieved something impossible. They had made the void swarm adapt to them instead of the other way around. Their chaotic, unpredictable tactics had confused an enemy that had been systematically defeating coalition forces for years. These humans are dangerous, he told Commander Valterra. They ignore our tactical doctrine, take impossible risks, and somehow achieve victory through pure chaos. Should we be concerned about their growing independence? She asked. Kethfer watched footage of human soldiers modifying alien technology. In the middle of combat, creating weapons and tactics that no coalition species had ever conceived? Not yet. They're still useful. But we must ensure they remain under our control. But control, as the Admiral would soon discover, was something that humans had never accepted willingly. The command center of the coalition flagship hummed with activity as holographic displays showed battle formations across 12 star systems. Captain Jake Rodriguez stood before the main tactical screen, his human uniform now bearing the insignia of a coalition officer. The promotion had come after his third impossible victory, when he had somehow convinced a void swarm bioship to attack its own fleet using nothing but modified communication arrays and pure audacity. Admiral Kethfer watched the human captain with growing unease. 6 months ago, Jake had been a terrified Marine sergeant pulled from his apartment. He commanded the respective alien officers who had served for centuries, and his tactical innovations had saved more coalition lives than any commander in recent history. The Void Swarm is learning from our previous engagements, Jake explained to the assembled commanders, his voice calm and confident. They've adapted their bio-neural networks to counter our standard attack patterns. Every time we use the same strategy twice, they become immune to it. Commander Valtara studied the tactical displays with interest. The human's analysis was correct, though she would never have approached the problem from his perspective. What do you suggest, Captain? We stop being predictable, Jake replied. The Void Swarm can adapt to any strategy they've seen before, but they can't prepare for something that doesn't follow any logical pattern. Admiral Kethfer's 4 eyes narrowed. You're suggesting we abandon military doctrine entirely? I'm suggesting we fight like humans instead of like coalition officers, Jake answered. Chaos is our greatest advantage. Every other species in the galaxy thinks in terms of order and logic. We don't. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was revolutionizing coalition battlefield medicine. Her hybrid techniques had reduced mortality rates by 40%. Combining human surgical aggression with alien nanotechnology, she moved between patients with practiced efficiency, her hands steady as she performed procedures that would have been impossible just months before. Dr. Mitchell called her assistant, a young Valtheri named Leandra. The burn victim from the Proxima engagement is showing signs of rejection. The nanobots are being attacked by his immune system. Sarah examined the patient, a Greyktal warrior whose tough gray skin had been partially dissolved by Void Swarm acid. The alien medical protocols called for gradual treatment over several days. But Sarah could see that the patient would die long before the nanobots could repair the damage. "We're going to try something new," she announced. Pulling up a holographic display of the patient's circulatory system, "We'll use human surgical techniques to remove the damaged tissue, then flood the area with concentrated nanobots. It's risky, but it's his only chance." The surgery took 4 hours. Sarah worked with the precision of a master craftsman, cutting away dead tissue while simultaneously directing nanobots to repair cellular damage at the molecular level. When she finished, the Gractal warrior's wounds were completely healed, something that should have been impossible given the extent of his injuries. Word of her success spread quickly through the Coalition medical corps. Human medics were being requested for the most difficult cases, and alien healers were studying human techniques with growing respect. Sarah had been promoted to Chief Medical Officer for all human forces, a position that made her one of the most influential beings in the Coalition military. But it was Tom Baker, who had become the Coalition's most valuable asset. The former college student now held the title of Chief Technical Analyst. His laboratory had become a place where the impossible happened on a daily basis. The room was a chaotic mix of human engineering and alien science, with half-finished projects covering every surface. "I've cracked their communication system," Tom announced during a strategy meeting, his eyes bright with excitement. "The Void Swarm uses quantum entanglement across their bioneural networks. Each ship is connected to every other ship instantaneously, allowing them to coordinate perfectly." Admiral Kethfer looked skeptical. "Our best scientists have studied void swarm biotechnology for 3 years. They found no evidence of quantum communication." Tom's smile was the kind that made aliens uncomfortable. It was too confident. "To knowing your scientists think like you do. They look for technology that follows logical patterns. The void swarm doesn't use technology in the way you understand it. They grow it." He activated a holographic display showing the internal structure of a captured void swarm communication node. "This isn't a machine. It's a living organism that happens to manipulate quantum fields. Your scientists were looking for circuits and processors. I was looking for neurons and synapses." Implications were staggering. If Tom was right, the void swarm's greatest advantage could be turned against them. By disrupting their quantum communication, human forces could blind the entire enemy fleet simultaneously. The test came at the Battle of Rigel Station. The void swarm had deployed their newest weapon, massive bioships, the size of small moons that could literally consume planets. The Coalition's conventional forces were in full retreat when Jake's human fleet arrived. "All units, execute protocol." Chaos. Jake ordered over the communication system. The human ships scattered in what appeared to be completely random directions. There was no formation, no coordinated attack pattern, no logical strategy that any military academy would have. Approved. The void swarm's predictive algorithms, designed to counter-organize resistance, couldn't adapt to pure chaos. Tom's signal jammers activated simultaneously, disrupting the quantum entanglement that connected the enemy bioships. For the first time in the war, void swarm units began attacking each other. Their communication severed and their coordination destroyed. Sarah's medical ships darted between the battle lines, providing emergency treatment to damaged human vessels. Her teams worked with incredible speed, using portable surgical equipment to keep ships operational even after they should have been destroyed. Mike Thompson, now a master engineer, directed repair crews that performed miracles with spare parts and improvised tools. His teams could rebuild a ship's engines using components from 3 different species, creating hybrid systems that worked better than the original designs. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it ended, the Coalition had won its first major victory against the Void Swarm in 2 years. The enemy bioships lay dead in space, their organic hulls dissolving as their life support systems failed. But the victory came with a price. Admiral Kethfer watched the battle recordings with growing concern. The humans had fought with incredible effectiveness, but they had also shown complete disregard for Coalition authority. "They're becoming too independent," he confided to his inner circle. "They modify our technology without permission, ignore our tactical doctrines, and their soldiers show more loyalty to their human commanders than to the Coalition." Commander Veltara pulled up intelligence reports from across the galaxy. There's more concerning news, Admiral. Our monitoring stations report that Earth has been attacked by Krex raiders. The humans' homeworld is under siege. Admiral Kethfer's expression remained cold. Good. That should remind them who they serve. But when the news reached the human forces, their reaction wasn't submission. It was rage. For the first time since their conscription, the humans had something more dangerous than tactical brilliance. They had a unified purpose that had nothing to do with the Coalition's war. The message spread through every human unit like wildfire. Earth was under attack. Our families were dying while they fought someone else's war. The species that had dragged them into battle as cannon fodder had left their homeworld. Defenseless, Captain Jake Rodriguez stood before a gathering of human officers, his expression grim. We've given everything to this war. Our lives, our freedom, our loyalty. And while we were bleeding for the Coalition, they let our world burn. The transformation was immediate and complete. The humans who had been loyal soldiers became something else entirely. Were still fighting the Void Swarm, but now they were fighting for their own reasons. Coalition had created the perfect soldiers, but they had forgotten one crucial detail about humanity. Humans never forgave those who betrayed them. The victory celebration in the Coalition Command Center was subdued. After 18 months of brutal warfare, the last Void Swarm bioship had been destroyed, their dimensional gateway sealed forever. The threat that had consumed 17 star systems and killed billions of sentient beings was finally over. But the cost had been enormous. And Admiral Kethfer knew the real challenges were just beginning. He stood before the massive holographic display showing casualty reports from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. Entire species had been reduced to scattered survivors. Ancient civilizations had been wiped from existence. And of the 2 million humans conscripted from Earth, only 800,000 remained alive. The losses are within acceptable parameters, he told Commander Valterra, though his voice carried little conviction. Better than our initial projections, considering the primitive nature of human physiology. Valterra studied the reports with growing concern. Admiral, the human units achieved a 93% mission success rate. That's higher than any Coalition species in recorded history. They were expendable, Kethfer replied coldly, designed to take risks that civilized species would not. Their success came at the cost of their lives, which was always the intention. But even as he spoke, Kethfer knew the situation was more complex than he wanted to admit. The humans had not simply died gloriously in battle. They had adapted, evolved, and transformed the very nature of warfare itself. Their innovations had saved countless Coalition lives. Their tactical brilliance had turned certain defeat into total victory. Prepare the transport ships, he ordered. The surviving humans will be returned to Earth with standard compensation packages. 1,000 credits per individual, medical treatment for war injuries, and a formal certificate of service. Valterra hesitated. The human commanders have requested a meeting. Tell them to report to debriefing Station 7. We'll process them with the other returning soldiers. They've requested a meeting with the Coalition Council. This equals Kethfer's 4 eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. Possible. These humans forget their place. They were conscripted servants, not invited allies. Arrange for their immediate transport to Earth. But when the transport orders went out, something unprecedented happened. The humans refused to comply. For the first time in Coalition history, conscripted soldiers had openly defied direct orders from the High Command. General Jake Rodriguez stood at the head of a delegation of human officers in the Coalition Council chamber. The former Marine sergeant now wore the uniform of a Coalition general, his chest decorated with medals from battles that had become legend. Beside him stood Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now bearing the title of Surgeon General. Her medical innovations having saved more lives than any healer in Coalition history. Tom Baker, the former college student who had become the Coalition's most valuable technical analyst, carried data tablets containing information that made the alien counselors very uncomfortable. His modifications to Coalition technology had not been limited to weapons and ships. He had been quietly mapping every system, every network, every weakness in the Coalition's infrastructure. "We're not going anywhere," Jake announced to the assembled council. "Not until we discuss terms." The council chamber erupted in alien voices, expressing outrage and disbelief. These were the same beings who had dismissed humans as primitive cannon fodder less than 2 years ago. Now they were faced with a species that had somehow transformed from helpless victims into confident negotiators. Counselor Morthak of the Velthari rose from his crystalline throne, his pale blue skin flushed with anger. "You dare make demands of this council? You forget your place, humans. You were conscripted to serve, not to negotiate." "Our species was enslaved," Sarah corrected, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much death. "Taken from our homes without consent, forced to fight in a war we knew nothing about, and treated as expendable resources." Admiral Kethfer leaned forward, his expression cold and dismissive. "You served the greater good. The Void Swarm threatened all civilized life. Your sacrifice was necessary." "Our sacrifice." Jake's voice carried a dangerous edge. "While we were bleeding for your coalition, our homeworld was attacked by Krex pirates. 200 million humans died because you left Earth defenseless." The chamber fell silent. This was information that most of the council had not been aware of. The Krex attacks on Earth had been classified, buried in military reports that few beings had clearance to read. "Regrettable," Kethfer replied after a long pause, "but hardly our responsibility. The Coalition cannot defend every primitive world from raiders." "You had ships to conscript our people," Sarah shot back. "You had the resources to transport 2 million humans across the galaxy, but you couldn't spare a single vessel to protect the world you stripped of its defenders." Tom Baker stepped forward, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The display showed Coalition fleet positions, supply lines, communication networks, and defensive installations. Every detail was perfect, every weakness highlighted. "This is every vulnerability in your infrastructure," Tom announced calmly. "Every backdoor we've installed in your systems. Every modification we've made to your weapons and ships. Every alliance we've built with species you've ignored or exploited." The council members stared at the display in stunned silence. They were seeing their own civilization laid bare, analyzed and cataloged by the species they had considered primitive. The humans had not just been fighting their war. They had been learning, adapting, and preparing for this moment. "You're threatening the Coalition?" asked Counselor Tessara of the Kethmori, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're negotiating," Jake replied. "We want full membership in the Coalition Council, with voting rights equal to any founding species. We want reparations for Earth's reconstruction, enough resources to rebuild what was lost during the Krex attacks, and we want formal apologies for the forced conscription of our people." "And in return?" Morthok asked. "We'll share our technical innovations with Coalition species. We'll continue serving as military advisors. And we'll help you integrate the other species you've been ignoring." Admiral Kethfer's expression darkened. "What other species?" Tom's smile was cold and calculating. "The 137 lesser species that you've been exploiting for centuries. The ones whose worlds you strip mine for resources. The ones whose people you conscript for dangerous labor. The ones who've been talking to us." The implications hit the council like a physical blow. The humans had not just been fighting the Void Swarm. They had been building relationships, forming alliances, creating a network of species that had been marginalized by the Coalition's rigid hierarchy. "This is blackmail," Kethfer accused. "This is consequence," Jake replied. "You dragged us into your war, treated us as disposable, and left our world to burn. Now you have to live with what you created." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her medical bag in hand. "We've saved lives from dozens of species. We've shared our knowledge freely. We've proven that cooperation works better than exploitation, and if we refuse your terms..." Counselor Morthak asked. Tom's display changed, showing ship movements and resource flows. "Then we take our innovations and leave, along with our allies. The species you've been ignoring suddenly have access to human technology, human tactics, In human determination, how long do you think your monopoly on power will last? The council chamber fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. The humans had not just survived their ordeal, they had emerged as a power in their own right, with allies, resources, and the knowledge to challenge the coalition's authority. We need time to consider, Morthak said finally. You have 48 hours, Jake replied. After that, we begin implementing our own plans. The council adjourned for emergency deliberations, but the damage was done. The species they had conscripted, as cannon fodder, had become players in the galactic game, and the old order was about to change forever. The morning sun cast golden light through the massive windows of the coalition. Council chambers as President Jake Rodriguez reviewed the daily reports from across the galaxy. 5 years had passed since the end of the Void Swarm War, and the changes were still rippling through every corner of civilized space. The former Marine Sergeant now sat in a chair that had once been reserved for the galaxy's most powerful beings. Wearing the simple blue uniform of the Human Federation, Admiral Kethfer entered the chamber with his usual measured steps. But Jake could see the weariness in his 4 golden eyes. The proud alien commander who had once dismissed humans as primitive cannon fodder now found himself working alongside the species he had underestimated so completely. Their weekly meetings had become a necessity as the galaxy's power structure continued to shift in ways neither of them had anticipated. The Outer Rim colonies are requesting human agricultural advisors, Jake reported, sliding a data tablet across the polished table. The Zephyrian farmers want to learn our soil rotation techniques. Apparently our primitive methods are producing crop yields 30% higher than coalition standard. Kethfer studied the report with barely concealed frustration. The coalition's advanced hydroponic systems and genetic modification programs were being outperformed by simple human farming techniques that required nothing more than understanding soil chemistry and crop rotation. It was another humbling reminder of how much the aliens had to learn from the species they had once considered backward. The Council of Agricultural Sciences is concerned about these developments, Kethfer admitted. They believe that adopting human techniques will lead to technological regression. Maybe they're worried about losing their monopoly on food production, Jake replied with a slight smile. When farmers can grow more food using simple methods, they don't need expensive coalition technology.
Doctor.
Sarah Mitchell arrived for the meeting, carrying her medical bag and a stack of research files. The former trauma surgeon from Boston had been appointed as the coalition's chief medical officer, a position that made her one of the most influential beings in the galaxy. Her hybrid medical techniques had revolutionized interspecies healthcare, combining human surgical aggression with alien nanotechnology to create treatments that saved lives across 47 different species. We've had another breakthrough in the burn treatment protocol, she announced, setting down her files. The combination of human skin grafting with Velthari regeneration gel is showing remarkable results. We're seeing complete recovery in cases that would have been fatal just 5 years ago. Sarah's medical corps had become the most sought-after healing organization in the galaxy. Her teams included doctors, nurses, and medics from dozens of species, all trained in techniques that no single species could have developed alone. The humans who had once been considered expendable were now teaching other species how to save lives. Tom Baker burst into the chamber with his usual enthusiasm, his arms full of data tablets and prototype devices. The former college student had transformed from a scared 19-year-old into the galaxy's most innovative engineer. His technical innovation division employed scientists from across the known worlds, working on projects that combined human creativity with alien technology in ways that should have been impossible. I've cracked the faster-than-light communication problem, he announced, setting a small device on the table. Remember how the Void Swarm used quantum entanglement for instant communication? I've figured out how to replicate it using synthetic bioneural networks. The device hummed quietly, its organic curves pulsing with soft blue light. Tom had somehow managed to grow artificial neural tissue that could manipulate quantum fields, creating a communication system that connected distant worlds instantly. The implications were staggering. This will revolutionize galactic commerce, Kethfer observed, studying the device with professional interest. Instant communication across any distance could unite the galaxy in ways we never imagined. That's the idea, Tom replied. No more information delays. No more isolated colonies. Every world connected to every other world in real time. Commander Velterra entered the chamber, carrying intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The elegant Velthari officer had become an unexpected ally to the humans. Recognizing that cooperation was more profitable than conflict, her reports painted a picture of a galaxy in transition, where old power structures were crumbling and new alliances were forming daily. The Krek Syndicate has formally requested a peace treaty, she announced. The same raiders who attacked Earth during the war are now asking for protection from human-led coalition forces. Jake laughed, remembering the fear and helplessness he had felt when Earth was attacked while humanity fought someone else's war. They've discovered that picking on smaller species isn't profitable when those species have human military advisors and modern weapons. The transformation of galactic politics had not been without casualties. Several of the Coalition's founding species had attempted to maintain the old order through various means, only to discover that the galaxy had moved beyond their control. The Valthari had tried to embargo human colonies, believing that economic pressure would force humanity back into submission. Instead, they found their own worlds cut off from the new trade networks that humans had established with former client species. Within 6 months, Valthari merchants were begging for access to human-controlled markets. The Greykdal had attempted a military coup, convinced that their warrior culture made them the natural leaders of the galaxy. They had been defeated by a coalition of species they had previously dominated, all trained in human tactical doctrine and armed with weapons modified using human innovations. The proud warriors discovered that strength alone was meaningless against enemies who fought with intelligence and creativity. "You've destroyed everything we built," Kethfer said quietly during one of their private conversations. The Coalition maintained order for 3,000 years. "You maintained control," Jake corrected. "There's a difference between order and oppression. Real order requires justice, and there was none in your system. You conscripted us because you thought we were expendable. Now, you're learning that nobody is expendable." The rigid caste system that had defined galactic civilization for millennia was giving way to something more fluid and fair. Species that had been treated as second-class citizens were asserting their independence, backed by human technical assistance and military training. The galaxy was becoming a place where merit mattered more than species origin. Earth itself had become a symbol of this transformation. The planet that had once been dismissed as a primitive backwater was now home to the Coalition's most advanced research facilities. The scars left by the Krex attacks had been rebuilt into something better, creating cities that combined human architecture with alien technology. Multiple species lived and worked together in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. "What happens now?" Kethfer asked, staring out at the stars visible through the chamber's massive windows. Jake joined him at the window, watching ships from dozens of species moving through the busy space lanes around the Coalition capital. "Now we live with the consequences of our choices. You chose to drag us into your war. We chose to become something more than victims." The galaxy's future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The age of unchallenged authority was over. The species that had been conscripted as cannon fodder had become the galaxy's catalyst for change. And there was no returning to the old ways. In the end, Coalition had won their war against the Void Swarm, but they had lost something far more valuable. Their monopoly on power was broken. The humans they had dragged into battle had emerged not as grateful servants, but as equals, who refused to accept the galaxy's old inequalities. The consequences would echo through the stars for generations to come.